Fourth, final background issue, United States policy. The U.S. policy, we sort of run the film a little bit forward at this point. Everyone's read about the neocons in Washington, the neoconservatives who brought to the Pentagon particularly and the Vice President's office and influenced President Bush in a concept that they had developed pretty much in the think tanks in Washington during the 90s. Some very bright people, Paul Wolfowitz, Scooter Libby, who may or may not go to the Slammer, Fife, there's a whole group of people we can talk about around. These folks had a vision, and their vision was the U.S. is just dawdling around during the Carter administration. What we need is a big new strategic concept, and it's got to focus on the Middle East, which is the most neuralgic sort of fire hazard on the globe. And the secret for doing this is to export democracy to those countries, and the first target had better be Saddam Hussein, because he is the local firebrand. Now, they were absolutely right about the latter. Saddam Hussein, apart from committing genocide on his own people, had, during the 1980s, invaded Iran, and 9 years later, there had been 1 million casualties. You talk about numbers in Iraq. 1 million casualties, Iranians and Iraqis. So when you have someone says, oh, as soon as we leave, the Iranians are going to climb into bed with the Iraqis, just remember, that's a country full of veterans of that war who came back mutilated and very hostile to the Iranians. Now, what does that mean? Who knows? But he had also invaded a neighbor, Kuwait, and annexed it, called it the 19th province of Iraq. And the United States went to war, but with the complete support of the United Nations, having gone to the last mile to try diplomacy. Charlie is going to talk to us about the diplomatic approaches available here. And only after the Secretary General of the UN went to Baghdad twice to negotiate this thing did everyone sign on, and the U.S. expelled Saddam Hussein and his forces from Iraq. It was 1991.
Kuwait.
Excuse me, Kuwait, 1991. Thank you. Now, the notion of exporting democracy is very American. When George W. Bush, in his inaugural address in January of 2005, announced the policy of exporting American values, which are universal values, that was the centerpiece of our policy, he was saying much of what Lyndon Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, to some extent Thomas Jefferson had said. But on the other side of the argument, which was raging back in Jefferson's day and in our day, was John Adams saying America goes abroad, does not go abroad, monsters to destroy. In other words, stay home, tend to your knitting, be a model for the world. I've got a final chapter in this book spelling out that very American piece of ideological history. The only problem, and by the way, I would love to see democracies everywhere. They don't go to war with each other normally. They're easy to work with. They're decent to their people. But Iraq, we started with elections, which should be the end stage of the democratic process. Because the democratic process, in one sentence, requires an agreement to disagree peacefully on issues, not go to war about them, to legislate them, to protect minorities, and to have a rule of law. And also to have some education, if you believe Thomas Jefferson, that that's a precondition for democracy. And the U.S., I think, has gone at it backwards Have an election in Palestine. Oh my God, the Hamas has won it. Have an election in Iraq. The Shiites have won it. Muqtada al-Sadr has 90,000, 60,000, whatever the number, in his Mahdi militia. Is that what we wanted? Well, the preconditions for democracy, I would argue, as a political scientist, are not there yet. So that's been a problem in the recent past of American policy that profoundly affects what we're talking about here tonight.